The year was 1865, and the frontier carried the stench of gunpowder and horse sweat. Dust blew down the single street of Clearwater, a half-forgotten town pressed against the desert's edge. Lanterns already burned in the saloon windows, though the sun hadn't quite fallen. Shadows stretched long, the air heavy with the kind of silence that breaks only when violence is close. He rode in slow, the lone rider, a man with no company but his horse and the scars etched across his jaw. Folks watched him from porches and windows, their eyes sharp, weighing the stranger. He tipped his hat, but said nothing. Silence followed him like a shadow. The cowboy dismounted at the hitching post outside the saloon. His boots struck the boards with the weary way of a man who had seen too much and cared too little. He wanted whiskey, nothing else. Not talk, not trouble. Just something to burn the throat and dull the memories. Inside, the saloon reeked of smoke, sweat, and cheap perfume. Cards slapped on tables. A fiddle scratched a tune that no one really listened to. He ordered his drink and leaned on the bar, silent as ever. But the room shifted when the doors banged open. Two bounty men dragging a girl, dark hair tangled, wrists bound, dust coating her bare feet. She couldn't have been more than 16, 17 at most. Her eyes, black as obsidian, cut through the crowd though she made no sound. An Apache girl. The saloon buzzed like a nest of hornets. Voices rose, ugly and sharp. Caught her spying. One bounty man said, shoving her forward, sneaking near the old fort. She'll fetch a price. The other grinned, teeth yellow. Army'll pay. Or maybe the town will take justice in its own hands. The cowboy said nothing, though his hand tightened around his glass. He'd seen this before. A mob looking for blood, drunk on fear. The girl stood straight despite the rope burning her wrists. Her silence was defiance, sharper than any curse she could have spat. Men cursed her anyway, some spitting at her feet. A woman hissed from the corner. The tension grew heavy, choking. One man drew his revolver, waving it careless. Why wait? End her now, before her people burn us out. The crowd roared agreement. Boots scraped the floor. The girl's eyes flicked once, to the cowboy. Not pleading, not begging, just watching. He tried to look away, tried to remind himself she wasn't his concern. But then the first shot cracked, a glass exploding near her head. She didn't flinch, and that was the moment. He pushed off the bar, his voice low, steady. Put the gun down. The room stilled, then laughed. You talking, stranger? But laughter turned to chaos. The man with the revolver swung it toward the cowboy, and faster than thought, iron barked. The cowboy's Colt flared, and the man fell. The saloon erupted. Shots fired. Tables overturned. The air filled with smoke and screams. Through the haze, the cowboy saw her, still bound, struggling against the bounty men. One dragged her toward the door. The other aimed his rifle square at her chest. He didn't think. He moved. A bullet grazed his arm, hot fire tearing through flesh. He dropped one bounty man with a shot, then rammed his shoulder into the other, sending them both crashing into the street. The girl tumbled free, wrists still tied, eyes blazing. The crowd poured after them. And just like that, his quiet drink was gone. Trouble had him by the throat. The street blazed with lamplight and fury. Men shouted, guns fired. The cowboy dragged the girl toward his horse, blood dripping from his sleeve. She stumbled, rope biting her wrists, but kept pace without a word. Bullets sparked against stone as they vaulted into the saddle. He spurred his horse hard, and they shot down the main street, the wind tearing the smoke from their lungs. Behind them, riders mounted in a frenzy, torches lit, flames waving like devils in the dark. The desert swallowed them quick, but not quick enough. Hoofbeats thundered close. The cowboy fired over his shoulder, a muzzle flash tearing open the night. One pursuer cried out and fell, but more came. Always more. The girl clung to the saddle horn, silent still, eyes wide against the rushing dark. Her hair whipped his face, her breath sharp and fast. They tore through arroyos and mesquite, dust choking them, the horse stumbling over stone. Each shot from behind cracked the air. Too close, too many, Then the land opened, a dry wash spilling wide beneath the stars. He veered into it, pushing the horse to its limit. The pounding of hooves echoed off canyon walls, but slowly the sound thinned. The riders fell back, torches winking out one by one. Still he didn't stop, not until the horse sagged beneath them, sides heaving. Then, at last, he drew up in a stand of scrub where shadows thickened. He slid down, pulling the girl with him. Both collapsed in the dirt. The desert was quiet now, only the whisper wind and the horse's ragged breathing. The cowboy bound his wound with a strip torn from his shirt. Pain pulsed, but he'd live. The girl sat across from him, wrists still tied, face unreadable in the starlight. "You're free now," he muttered, sawing the rope with his knife. The fibers snapped. She rubbed her raw wrists, but said nothing. Not a thank you, not a word. Just those steady black eyes. He frowned. "You understand me, don't you?" No answer. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped. The cowboy cursed under his breath, wiping blood from his sleeve. He wanted to ask why she hadn't spoken. Was it fear? Pride? Something broken inside? But he wasn't one for questions. He wasn't one for much at all. She shifted, drawing her knees up, and for a moment her gaze softened. Then she turned her face away, back into the desert night. He felt the weight of it, that silence, heavy, unyielding, louder than any scream. They made camp in a dry gully, a small fire burning low. Sparks floated up into the dark like tiny souls. The cowboy fed the flames in silence, while she sat across, arms wrapped around herself. Neither spoke. The night pressed close, alive with unseen eyes. Finally, he tried again. "You got a name?" She only blinked, slow, deliberate. He sighed, shaking his head. "Don't matter. You're stuck with me till we're clear of this mess." She reached into the dust, drew a quick mark with her finger. A line, a circle, another line. Apache signs, maybe. He didn't understand. Her eyes lifted, locking on his. A question there. Maybe trust. Maybe warning. He looked away first. The fire popped. The desert whispered. His hand rested near his colt, though no enemy showed. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling of riders not far behind, waiting for dawn. When sleep came, it was thin, restless. Dreams of gunfire and faces he'd buried long ago. He woke to her hand on his shoulder. Not shaking, not panicked, just firm, insistent. She pointed toward the horizon. Tiny dust clouds rising. They hadn't given up. The riders were still coming. He strapped on his holster, jaw set. She stood beside him, silent as ever, but her stance steady, her eyes fierce. And in that moment he knew, whether he wanted it or not, they were bound together now. The sun rose cruel and merciless, baking the desert floor until heat shimmered like waves across the horizon. The cowboy and the girl moved slow, their shadows long, each step dragging as the land stretched endless before them. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, the bandage already soaked through. The wound wasn't fatal, but it stole strength from him with every mile. The girl glanced at it now and then, her face unreadable. She carried no words, only those dark eyes that measured everything. They had little water. He carried a flask at his side, half empty, and he'd taken only a sip since dawn. When he offered it to her, she shook her head. She bent instead near a dry arroyo, pressing her hand to the earth, studying cracks in the soil. Then she moved, swift and sure, to a cluster of cactus. With a sharp rock, she split one open, the pulp glistening wet. She lifted it toward him first. He frowned but took it. The water was bitter, but it wet his tongue, eased his throat. She ate in silence, her gaze never wavering from the land around him. She knew things he didn't. By midday, his horse faltered, sweat lathering its neck. He slid down, leading it on foot. The girl walked barefoot still, her soles tough as leather. Each time he glanced, she kept her chin high, refusing to show weakness. They passed the carcass of steer, ribs white against the sand. Vultures circled overhead, their shadows crossing the ground like blades. The cowboy felt them watching not just the dead, but the living. That night they camped under a mesquite tree, its branches brittle against the stars. He built a fire low, careful not to draw eyes. She gathered brush without a sound, her movements quick, efficient. When they sat across the fire, she tore strips of cactus and pressed them against his wound. The sting near buckled him. "You don't have to," he muttered. She pressed harder. Her silence was her answer. When he lay down, he found sleep slow to come. His thoughts drifted back to the town. The faces twisted with hate, the moment his gun spoke, the life he'd thrown away with a single choice. And always her eyes, watching him in silence. By morning, the air was sharp with cold. She woke him not with words, but a touch to his boot. She pointed east. On the horizon, a faint dust cloud rose. Riders. They hadn't lost them. The chase pressed them harder through jagged country. The land tore at boots and hooves alike. The trails nothing more than rock and scrub. The cowboy's wound burned hotter, but he kept moving because stopping meant death. They climbed into a ravine where shadows clung even in daylight. He heard the rattle first, low and mean, then the snake struck. The girl stumbled back as the rattler coiled near her foot, fangs flashing. She froze, breath shallow, not a sound from her lips. The cowboy drew, his revolver blur, and the shot echoed hard off stone. The snake writhed, then stilled. Dust settled heavy. Her eyes met his, wide now, not with fear, but something close to respect. She knelt, touched the dead serpent, then cut a strip of its flesh with her stone. She held it out, offering food. He grimaced, but hunger gnawed at him. Later, over a small fire, the meat sizzled, bitter smoke rising. He chewed it slow, the taste foul, but it filled the emptiness. She ate as well, calm, steady, as if she'd done it 100 times. When the fire died, the wilderness brought its own terror. A rustle in the brush, then the low growl of a cougar. Its eyes glowed from the dark, fixed on them. The cowboy reached for his revolver, but the girl shook her head. She picked up a burning branch, held it high, and strode toward the beast. The cougar snarled, tail lashing, but the fire drove it back. The girl stood tall, unwavering, until the shadows swallowed the predator whole. Then she returned, dropped the stick, and sat down as if nothing had happened. He stared at her, astonished. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" She gave no reply, only lowered her eyes and tore another piece of cactus for his wound. That night, while he kept watch, he found himself wondering what silence cost her, whether it was choice or wound, or both. He realized he wanted to know. He wanted to understand. By the third day, they stumbled onto a river swollen with spring melt, its current roaring cold spray on the wind. Across it lay safety, but the water churned wild, black with depth. The cowboy hesitated. "It'll sweep us under." The girl stepped forward, eyes fierce. Without hesitation, she dove. The current caught her, spun her, dragged her under. His heart lurched. Then she surfaced, hair plastered her face, kicking hard. She waved once, urging him on. Cursing, he led the horse in. The current battered them, stealing breath, dragging them sideways. He clung to the saddle horn, teeth grit, each kick a battle. Water filled his ears, roared in his skull. For a moment, he thought they'd be lost. But the horse lunged, found footing, and they spilled out on the far shore, coughing, soaked to the bone. She was already there, standing straight despite the river's fury, watching him. He realized then that silence wasn't weakness. It was steel. They built a fire that night in a grove of cottonwoods, flames reflecting in the water. He stripped off his wet coat, hands shaking, the wound reopening with the effort. She crouched beside him, grinding roots between stones, pressing the poultice to his arm. The pain was sharp, but the relief followed quick. He watched her in the firelight, the way shadows danced across her face, the way she worked with calm precision. Finally he spoke. "I fought in the war. Blue coat, long years. Saw too much killing. When it ended, I swore I'd never fight again. Guess that was a lie." She paused, looked up at him, her eyes catching the fire. No words, but something in her gaze softened. He drew a breath. "Funny thing, I've traveled near half the country, and I never met anyone who could stand quiet the way you do. It ain't empty, that silence. Feels like, he struggled for the word, feels like you're carrying something I can't see. Her lips pressed tight, her hand stilling. Then she broke a piece of breadroot in two, handed him half. It was the first gesture that felt almost like trust. They ate together in silence, fire snapping, river rushing nearby. And for the first time since he lifted his gun in that saloon, the cowboy felt a strange peace. Not safe, not free, but not alone. When dawn came, the fire was ashes. She touched his shoulder, pointed back toward the horizon. Dust trails rose again. The riders hadn't given up. He rose, holstered his Colt, met her gaze. Then we don't stop. She nodded once, silent still, but her eyes burned with the same fire as the rising sun. And so they pressed on, two shadows bound by fate, the land itself testing their will with every step. The desert dawn burned red, a thin sun spilling over canyon walls sharp as knives. The cowboy and the Apache girl pushed on, their shadows stretched long across the rock. Dust rose at their heels, but behind them, thicker clouds rose heavier, riders gaining ground. His wound burned, slowed him, but he kept moving. The girl's silence pressed it aside like a shield. Her presence steadied though her body trembled from exhaustion. She had not faltered once, and he found himself drawing strength from her resilience. The canyon closed around them, high cliffs hemming them in. The sound of hooves echoed off stone, multiplied until it felt like an army breathing down their necks. "Damn fools won't quit," he muttered, hand brushing the grip of his Colt. He glanced at her. "We make a stand here." She gave no answer, only met his eyes, her silence carrying a weight he understood now. She was not afraid. They reached a bend where boulders tumbled like the bones of giants. He tied the horse behind cover, checked the cylinders of his revolver. 6 rounds. The rifle slung at his back carried 5 more. 11 chances. That was all. The girl crouched beside him, her hands swift as she gathered stones, stacking them for cover. Her movements were sure, practiced. She knew battle, though her lips never told it. The first riders burst into view. Torches raised though the day was bright. The cowboy raised his rifle, sighted, fired. The first man toppled, his torch spinning into dust. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder in the canyon. Lead screamed past stone, sparking off rock. The cowboy reloaded, his movements sharp, efficient, though his arm bled fresh. The girl knelt beside him, steady hands reloading spent cartridges into his revolver. She moved with precision, eyes never wavering. For the first time, they fought as one. The riders spread, seeking angles. Bullets chewed stone. The cowboy ducked low, then rose, firing quick, short bursts. 2 more fell, their horses shrieking. Still more came, always more. Dust filled the air. The canyon thundered with hoofbeats, shouts, shots. The girl hurled stones at riders who crept too close, her aim fierce, each strike driving them back. The cowboy's breath came ragged, his body screaming, but his will held fast. He fired again, dropped another man. Then another. The air stank of smoke, blood, and sweat. A rifle cracked, and pain tore through his side. He staggered, dropped to a knee. The world spun, colors running together. He thought he'd fall for good, but then her hands, firm on his shoulders, holding him up, her eyes burned into his. Not pity, not fear. Steel. She lifted his revolver, pressed it into his palm, and closed his fingers tight. "Don't," she whispered. One word, soft as breath, yet sharper than any blade. The sound of her voice struck him harder than the bullet. He blinked, heart hammering, stunned. She spoke. After all this time, she spoke. And that single word carried more than 1,000. He dragged himself upright, teeth grit. Her strength steadied him, her silence, now broken, lift fire in him fierce as the rising sun. Together, they fought. He fired. She loaded. He shielded. She guided. The canyon rang with their defiance. One final rider charged, rifle raised high. The cowboy's last bullet flew true, striking clean. The man toppled, his horse thundering past. Then the canyon fell still. Smoke drifted. Bodies lay scattered. torches guttering in the dust. The only sound was the wind sighing through stone. The cowboy leaned hard on the boulders, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. The girl stood beside him, silent once more, but her silence was different now. Not distance, not refusal, but bond. They staggered to the canyon until the land opened to a high ridge. The dawn spread wide there, washing the desert gold. The cowboy's strength ebbed with each step, his vision tunneling. He knew the wound was deep. He sank against a rock, body heavy as iron. The girl knelt before him, hands pressing hard on his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Her silence trembled now, her eyes fierce but wet with fire. "You spoke," he rasped, voice rough as gravel. "Why now?" She met his gaze. For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then, soft as a rustle of leaves, she whispered again. "Because you listened." The words cut him deeper than any bullet. He had spent years alone, a man who turned from voices, from people, from life. Yet this girl, who had carried silence like a burden, had broken it for him. He tried to laugh, but it came out a cough. "Guess we're both liars. Me, saying I'd never fight again. You, saying nothing at all." Her lips pressed tight. She shook her head, then touched his arm, firm. Refusal to let him sink. The sun climbed higher, lighting the ridge, painting the desert endless. No riders came. No enemies stirred. The fight was done, for now. The cowboy struggled to his feet, leaning heavy on her shoulder. Every breath was pain, but every step forward was defiance. At the ridge's edge they paused. The desert stretched endless, raw and merciless, yet alive with promise. She turned to him then, and for the first time she spoke her name in her tongue. The words were soft, foreign, impossible for him to shape. But he nodded, understanding without knowing. He touched his hat, his voice low. "Reckon it suits you." They stood together as the dawn spread. Two figures bound not by blood or word, but by fire, silence, and survival. And though the cowboy knew more trials waited, knew the land would test him again and again, he felt something stir inside that he hadn't felt in years. A will to keep walking. A will to carry more than just his own weight. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and blood away. In its place came something cleaner, something like hope. The cowboy turned his eyes to the horizon, his voice steady, though meant as much for the listener as for himself. "Frontier will kill you if you let it, but sometimes, it teaches you how to live." And with that, they walked on, the rising sun at their backs, the silence between them no longer emptiness, but bond, their steps carrying them into a future the desert could not take away.